Welcome to session 5 of the NASPA Equity-Driven High Achievement Outcomes-Based Assessment course. My name is Marilee Bresciani Ludvik, she, her, hers, and I have the privilege of serving as your facilitator along this way. This session, we'll be explaining the purpose of equity-driven outcomes-based assessment. This may sound rather silly to have an entire session on this. However, in our research, both in 2006 and again in 2018, we found that many people still don't understand why they would engage in outcomes-based assessment, let alone equity-driven outcomes-based assessment. As such, it requires a conversation among the facilitators or those responsible for ensuring that equity-driven high achievement for all takes place. And especially now, in times when resources are so tight and capacity is so constrained, the intentionality we bring to everything we do needs to be crystal clear. If we're not clear on the purpose, we won't know whether we're engaging in extraneous inquiry or documentation that's just not necessary. So as we move forward, while we'll provide you with some guiding questions and purposes, we hope you share what you're discovering and what you find meaningful to you on the LMS discussion board. This will help us all, our larger community of learning, to find different ways to think about this and approach this work and to engage in creating even more efficiencies. While we're continuing to move forward with this model, an equity-driven, high achievement for all iterative outcomes-based assessment program review model, we're really focusing just on this outcomes-based assessment. And so what is the purpose? Why are you here? Why are you investing your time in this? What do you believe this stuff does or can create within your organization? You may want to pause the video here and just have that conversation. If you're here because you're forced to be here or it's a requirement for you to be here, we want to invite in this, that none of this exists just because of its own sake. So for me, I've been a proponent for quite a long time that organizations exist in service to something or someone or a group of people, and so do processes. So outcomes-based assessment does not exist for its own process. And I say this and pause this and emphasize this because what's happened since 2006 is that there are some organizations that have appeared to want assessment to persist for assessment's sake, and that is not its purpose. There are also organizations that exist that are continually reminding us why assessment exists. It's not just because you have to have assessment. It's because there is something that it's cultivating. It's cultivating thoughtful, intentional, evidence-based decision-making or evidence-informed decision-making. In this case, we're taking on inquiry to intentionally close equity gaps, to advance equity decisions, to drive equity decisions, and ensure high achievement for all. So for a lot of you in this session, it's really taking most of what you do, that innate intellectual curiosity, but it's making it systematic. The systematic piece is incredibly important. What we've seen, what we saw in 2006 and what we saw again in 2018 is that there are starts and stops to this inquiry. There are starts and stops to our commitment to closing equity gaps. There are starts and stops to our intentional holistic learning and development, design, delivery, and assessment. What we want to do is make this a habit. It's a reflection on the end result of our doing. It's really stopping and say, how well are we accomplishing what we say we are? How are we checking ourselves, not outsiders checking ourselves? And outsiders meaning people who don't know about the complexity of the students we serve or our values and the way that we serve them. Strategic and action planning are incorporated into it. We showed this in the model back here. You can see that strategic planning is a part of the inputs. It drives your mission, goals, and outcomes. We'll talk more about this later. And action planning is the actual ways you deliver that outcome, the thoughtful, intentional, equitable ways you deliver those outcomes. It has to be linked to performance indicators, and especially equity-driven high achievement indicators, so that you can ensure high achievement for all. If we don't link this to those, then what has happened has already happened, which is that assessment gets thrown out the door because it's not linked to illustrating how institutions are advancing in their ability to close equity gaps and serve institutions and meet their institutional goals or directives or purpose, the whole reason they were created. So it's intended to inform decisions for improvement and resource reallocation, and this requires prioritizing. Now, this particular session, series of sessions, this course does not go into thinking about prioritizing. We have a session that touches upon it toward the end. Please don't skip ahead, but well, you can do whatever you want to. But there's a prioritization process that needs to happen in resource reallocation. And the invitation here is that it's driven based on your organizational values, goals, and outcomes, what it is that you're trying to achieve. Those may be represented in your strategic plan, or they may not, depending on who created your strategic plan and how it was created, and whose voices were not involved or included in that strategic plan. So this process also helps you explain specifically how you're contributing, as we mentioned, to those institutional strategic initiatives that may or may not be in your strategic plan, and those performance indicators, especially those of advancing equity and high achievement. The other thing that I've always loved about outcomes-based assessment, and really imperative and equity-driven outcomes-based assessment, is it makes clear the purpose of your programs. It really makes clear what each and everything you do is intending to create and co-create in partnership with students, community partners, faculty, staff, administrators, alumni, employers, the whole shebang. So it promotes responsibility for learning, particularly among the students. They see, and it helps them navigate their choices, really empowers them to make decisions. Therefore, it promotes these opportunities for collaboration of design, of not only the opportunity, but its assessment and the decisions for improving. It also manages expectations. So I've experienced this a lot in over 30 years of utilizing these processes and refining them, is that the more we learn about how students learn and develop, the more we can manage expectations about what's really possible in a 1-hour workshop or 16 one-hour workshops or 4 years even. And it, as we mentioned, can inform resource requests and professional development opportunities. Really, really important that we embody learning organization. And what we want to emphasize here is that all types of assessment have value: needs assessment, utilization of services assessment, satisfaction. But we're really talking about here is learning and development. We have to pay attention to learning and development because that's what we're all about, is cultivating learning and development. And again, because we don't know enough. We know a lot more than we did in 2006 about advancing learning and development. But we still have so much to learn, especially with how context and culture influence that. And so we have to engage in outcomes-based assessment in order to discover more and about what needs to be tweaked for whom and how and when. CAS has tremendous resources and can serve as a framework. I want to emphasize here that while we'll be utilizing a lot of research terminology in this course, we'll be using research methodology, some research methodology in this course, that outcomes-based assessment is not research. It's not generalizable beyond the context and culture that is being assessed. And that's why when we talked about the importance of disaggregating, it's imperative that data be disaggregated. We need to understand who we are in service to and how well we are serving them in this particular context, in this particular culture, in this particular situation. So the uses of the data, we've talked a lot about this already, so I'll go over these quickly. Obviously, you can demonstrate your contributions to your institutional mission, goals, and outcomes, institutional learning outcomes if you have them. It can help you set priorities, especially elevate equity-driven high achievement. Can help you prioritize your time as well as other resources. So this is again, the model that we're using for this course. Bring in whatever you would like to. As you can see in this model, it includes Aston's IEO as well, with the inputs and the outputs. So our invitation to you, again, post any questions or comments that you may have, but our institution for you is twofold. You can either go back to chatting with your colleagues as you did in an earlier assignment where we asked you to dialogue with specific people about what equity-driven high achievement means to them, so you can get an understanding that you're working with colleagues who don't share definitions. The same is true for outcomes-based assessment. So we'd like for you to engage some colleagues about what they think equity-driven outcomes-based assessment is and its relevance, its importance, its purpose, and see how they talk about it. And then think about how you would approach your administrative colleagues, faculty colleagues, students, community partners, including employers or graduate schools, community advocates, and whomever you're in service to. Just talk to them about how they view this and think about how they view that, how you might want to refine this model, and therefore refine your inquiry as we go forward. But again, invitation, post your questions and comments anytime. And thank you again for your time. We're so excited to be on this learning journey with you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session.